Welcome to the Friday edition of Juan's World, and I'm glad to report that I'm out of lockdown as of today, which is actually Thursday, May 6th, although this will not show until Friday, May 7th, which is when I'm going to start teaching again. I usually teach on Fridays, and so I always make the videos the day before. And I thought I'd do something different today. When I used to teach in New York, I had a class called Culture and Personality, kind of a strange atavism in a way, because culture and personality has not been part of anthropology for 60 or 70 years now. The idea that cultures produce people who have particular personalities that relate to that culture. So there's a German personality and a Japanese personality and so forth, which came about because of people like Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead, who were commissioned by the United States War Department to analyze the personalities of the enemies of the United States as a way of defeating them, which is not a good use of anthropology, and it's not a particularly useful way of thinking about cultures. But anyway, I used to teach the class more of a sort of kind of ramble around anthropology, if you like. It was my most popular class by a country mile. And usually in that class, I would take one day when I would tell the class, what I'm going to talk about today will not be on any test and will not necessarily be relevant to anything associated with your degree or anything else. And so, if you want to leave, you may do so. And this is important because I took attendance every class, and they had to attend every class with the possibility of escaping from 2 of them without penalty, but more than 2 in a semester of 15 weeks, twice a week. So that's 30 classes. They had to be there for 28, otherwise they failed the class. End of story. But I told them on this one day, once I took attendance, and I said, okay, from now on, you're free to go. And there's, I guess, a certain amount of narcissism about it, because I expected pretty much everyone to stay because I'm such a vibrant, charismatic teacher or some such. But of course, about half the class would just get up and leave. And I never held it against any of the students if they had something else they wanted to do that was more important than my class, or if they just didn't want to listen to me. Well, that was fine. That was the deal. And then what I would do is I would give what I used to call a spirit lecture. That is, I was completely unprepared. I had no idea what I was going to talk about. Just once everything settled down, I was just going to talk for 90 minutes, or what remained of the class. So probably about 80 minutes or a little bit less. Normally, my classes were not super prepared. Like when I was a graduate student teaching Intro to Anthropology, and when I was a new assistant professor, I used to spend a lot of time writing my lecture notes, which I followed fairly closely. But as I got older and more familiar with the material, I found myself relying on my notes less and less and less. And there was a certain point when I would, always take my notes to class. And I gradually used them less and less. And then one day, quite a long time into my teaching career, 15 years or more, I just stopped taking them to class. What I would do instead was I would think about the topic of the day that I needed to talk about. And I knew the subject matter so well that I didn't need notes. I just needed a kind of mental refresher so that when I was commuting to work, and my commute took about 2 hours by car, I would just sit and think about what I was going to talk about. Let's say I was going to talk about warfare in Papua New Guinea, a very popular topic in anthropology. Then I would just think about, let's see, what am I going to have to talk about? Okay, I need to talk about the film Dead Birds, because that's an intrinsic part of it. I'm going to need to talk about Mei Ring cultural ideals, so the structure of warfare, and I just put it all together, and then I would just go into class and just do it. But then on this one day in Culture and Personality, I would just talk, and what would happen, really amazing, is that a topic would eventually arise out of my complete and utter rambling, and I would focus on that. But it would take a while. And so I thought, well, let me see if I can do that now. I'm not going to do it for very long. Don't know how long. And you'll notice, I hope, that there will be no cuts or edits in this video. Usually I stop because I've run out of ideas and I have to just think for a little bit, or maybe I've got a coughing fit, or I need to blow my nose, or get a drink or something like that, and I stop. But I'm going to try to just shoot this straight, and let's see where we get. So let's get started. Now, lockdown has certainly given me an awful lot of things to think about. I wouldn't say that I have been especially cut off, because I usually spend most of my time at home anyway. I go to the supermarket 2 or 3 times a week. I used to take my bicycle out, especially on Sundays, to go doing photography. And I really ought to do more of that, because I've got a new camera and I really don't know how to operate it very well. I mean, I know how to point and shoot, and it's a very good camera in that respect. But I really need to do some more photography, and the lockdown has, of course, completely shut that down. Now, in the period February to the end of May, I teach at a Bible college here, and I haven't been doing that. So I've been a little bit more isolated. I usually have 1 or 2 Zoom calls in the week, and that connects me with people. But otherwise, I'm doing my editing. I've almost finished the edit of my fieldwork book, which is very exciting. It's due on May 15th and probably going to beat that deadline by a week or so. I'm mostly done. I've got a consultant working with me now, and she's a little bit sporadic in her commentary, but we've done all of the main chapters and just have to think about dressing up what's called the front matter, that is the preface, and I've asked her to write a foreword and one or two other bits and pieces. I have to look at the bibliography again because it's been through so many edits that I've added books and deleted books and nothing very interesting, but I've got that going. And one of the things that the lockdown got me thinking about was how people deal not so much with change, but with what I suppose you could characterize as crisis. Now, the pandemic here in Cambodia, I wouldn't exactly call a crisis as it is in other countries, for two reasons. One of them is that until recently we had virtually no cases in the country and no deaths. Until February 20th, we'd had around 450 positive cases, most of them brought into the country from China, and no deaths. And then on February 20th, 4 women who had tested positive bribed a security guard at the hotel where they were quarantined and got out and started spreading COVID. Now, what did not come out for a very long time was that they were prostitutes. They were 4 Chinese women brought in from China by a Chinese businessman for his clients in Phnom Penh. And I don't know where the initiative came from, but somehow or other they managed to bribe a guard, which is not terribly difficult in Cambodia because most people have very little income. And so like $10 will get you an awful long way here. I don't know the exact percentages, but I think that at least half of the population of Cambodia lives on around $1 a day. So yeah, $10 will get you a lot, and people are easily bribed. One way or another, the police are easily bribed. But this was a security guard. Wasn't even police, was just a guy whose job was to keep things safe. I have a security guard in my apartment building here. Is a young man. He's married with a little baby. They live here, and he mostly just kind of sits in a uniform at a desk and keeps the gate locked during the night hours and checks to make sure that people who come in and out of the building belong there and so forth. So anyway, these prostitutes got out, and of course they went about their business, and they had a lot of clients. They visited bars and hotels, and all of a sudden COVID started spreading and couldn't be controlled. So we went from 400 cases or around that in 1 year to now we've got about 15,000 cases and 78 deaths, which is why the government eventually flipped out. Now, when you think about these things in a more holistic way, 15,000 cases in a country of 16 million is really not that many. And obviously they don't want it to continue to spread, but what they ought to be doing, rather than locking down, is vaccinating everybody And in a country like Cambodia, unlike the United States or the United Kingdom even, where vaccination is voluntary, here the government can say, sorry, it ain't voluntary. You know, and if they were going to do lockdown, which they did, I mean, they told us, like, you cannot leave your house or your apartment except for very limited cases. You can go to the doctor, you can get food, and you could probably go to work if you get a government certificate to say that your work is essential. But the first part of the lockdown, I didn't go anywhere. I stayed in my apartment for 2 weeks and ran myself pretty much out of food, but I had a lot. I was prepared. And it's an interesting thing that I am prepared for like a 2-week lockdown. Just not because I normally have tons and tons and tons and tons of food because of the possibility of problems, but just because I think I'm just, you know, bored, I guess. I would just go to the supermarket 2 or 3 times a week and I would just get stuff. So I had plenty of meat in the freezer. Sorry, I'm going to just check to make sure that this is still working. Yep. Sorry about that. And that'll show you that I'm not editing, I'm just rambling. So, you know, like every time I went to the supermarket, I would say, oh, that looks nice, and I'd bring some meat home and put it in the freezer. I always keep my bread in the freezer because I use very little bread, and so I buy a big loaf and it'll last me 2 weeks, but it won't last out in the open. It'll mold. Everything molds here. If I don't keep fruit in the refrigerator, it will mold. That's why in past videos you've seen me doing things like putting mangoes and bananas in simple syrup. It's mostly just to keep them because I can't keep bananas, if they're ripe, more than about 2 days. And that's one of the things about the tropics, is that you have to adjust your world from temperate zones in a number of ways. You have to watch out for cuts. Pretty much everyone that I'm aware of here carries some kind of antibiotic cream with them, so that if they get a cut, they immediately put antibiotic cream on it to prevent infection. There's lots of stuff like that. So what seems to be coming to my mind here is that crisis, like the pandemic, is a test of the system. Just as when you have a factory that's making certain products, whether it be small or large, small like tools or something like that, or large like cars, they go about testing their product to destruction, see what its limits are. And that's generally a good thing. Like if your car manufacturer does crash tests, it lets you know how well you're going to do if you have like a front collision, if you buy that car, or if you buy a certain tool, then you can be assured that it's not going to break when you least expect it, and so forth. So you can think of cultures in the same way. How do they react in a crisis, and can we assess their value based on that? And I would say that the United States has, more than any other country in my experience, being put to the test by COVID, also by the Trump administration in general, which I think of as a different kind of crisis, but it's also a shake-up, let's put it that way. That a lot of the fault lines in United States culture have been exposed because of the crisis, like the bigotries about foreigners, about skin color, and so forth, have all surfaced. And personally, I don't find that at all shocking, because I lived in the United States for 40 years and I saw it face to face and recognized it. But a lot of people who've lived there all their lives and who have lived relatively sheltered lives haven't necessarily seen it. But COVID has definitely pinpointed things that are seriously wrong with United States culture. Not so much with the culture of United Kingdom. It does seem to be a more compliant culture. People do tend to say, okay, I need to get a vaccination, and they trot off down to the clinic and get it, and then complain about it and complain about the side effects and so forth. And various countries, like New Zealand, for example, have done extraordinarily well. And China has done quite well, but for quite different reasons. Yeah, like China's an authoritarian country, and so when they have lockdowns, as they do here in Cambodia, when they have a lockdown, you obey. And the reason you obey is that you'll be severely punished if you don't. My lockdown, the first lockdown, not the second one, the first lockdown, had armed military police at the entrance to my street. And you don't mess with those guys. I mean, they look nice enough on the surface, but they're not like the local police. Same as it was in Argentina. Like the local police, kind of okay. You can bribe them. You can get along with them. In Argentina, I had friends who used to smoke joints, and if a cop ever caught them, he's more likely to ask, like, can I have a toke? They were fine. The military police, the gendarmerie in Argentina and in Cambodia, you do not mess with those guys. Those are the guys they bring out on election day, for example. They've got heavy weapons with them, and they're not afraid to use them. And in certain conditions here, they're told to shoot to kill. For example, during elections here, if anyone begins to stage a protest, the military police have the authority to shoot to kill anyone who's protesting. During COVID, anyone who crosses the border from Thailand in the northern part of Cambodia, the guards there, they're not military police, they're actually army, and they're told anyone crossing the border from Thailand is to be shot. Yeah. So you don't mess with those people. But what's interesting to me about Cambodia is that all of this is completely ad hoc. It's just like, oh no, we've gone from 400 to 15,000 cases. Let's just lock down. Well, lockdown by itself may flatten the curve a little bit, but you need to be doing other things. And what happened here was that after 2 weeks, the curve wasn't being flattened. In fact, on some days, towards the end of the first lockdown, the cases were spiking. We had been doing around 400, 450 cases a day, which went up to 550, and then by the end of the lockdown, we were up to 650, and then it was going down a little bit. Now, one of the things that I would want to know, if I were in the government, which you can thank your lucky stars I'm not, if I was in the government, I'd want to know, why are the cases spiking when there's lockdown? And the government's answer, with no evidence as far as I can tell, is that people are breaking the lockdown. They're getting out, they're going around, they're having parties and whatnot. Well, I just didn't see any of that. My street was very, very quiet. The houses that have parties normally on the weekends had no parties. There was no traffic. People were playing badminton in the middle of the street. So that can't be the case. Also, interestingly, the government had put a ban on the sale of alcohol, because they were thinking, okay, when people get together, they drink and they do foolish things. So that must be the case. But on the surface, it just seems to me like there's something deeper that is causing the spread that is not people breaking lockdown. What is it? Well, the government isn't asking that question. It's just saying we need more lockdown. So the first 2 weeks were very stringent, and then they said, okay, another week, and then yesterday or the day before, the government said can't keep it up. So Thursday you're free to go about your business, although we're going to still lock down a few hotspots here and there. Well, I don't know what difference it's going to make. I'll have to keep watching the statistics to see. But I got out very early in the morning today to make sure that everything was open. It was. So 8 o'clock I got on my bicycle, rode to the center of the town, because my residence visa expires tomorrow, which is the day this is showing, May 7th. And I've been slightly concerned that the visa would actually expire. So I thought, the first thing I got to do is go to an agent. Went to the agent, didn't allow anyone in the store, so I had to do it on the curbside, as I had to do a while back. Last year, last April, they wouldn't allow anyone in the store, and it worked out. Today when I went, there was absolutely no one there, and no one really manning the store either. They did eventually come, and we sorted it all out. So I'm okay for another year. But that was unusual. I went to the supermarket and there wasn't even anyone taking my temperature when I walked in. They didn't have more than one entryway open. They usually have 3. They only had 1. And they had a bottle of sanitizer and an infrared temperature machine, but there's no one there. So things are like really, really relaxed. And I don't know. I don't know what they need to do is to ramp up vaccination. Just get everybody vaccinated and everything will be okay. Now they're using the Sinopharm vaccine, the Chinese vaccine, which is not available for people over 60, so I can't take it. I don't know what I'm going to do. But right now, like, I'm just going about my business. So that's how Cambodia reacts to what I'm calling crisis. You know, it's not an absolute crisis, but and it's not one that the government is particularly concerned about in terms of the next election or whatever, because the government here just either puts opposition parties in jail or they flee the country. So the party in power doesn't have to worry about losing an election because they didn't handle COVID very well. It just exposes their lack of ability to deal with problems. Interesting. But my other part, and I guess this will be what I'm concluding with, so that, in other words, what I've kind of got myself into here is, how does crisis, in a sense, help us understand ourselves? Well, so I'm saying that one way it helps us is to understand how our culture responds to crisis. The other part is, how do individuals respond to crisis? And I can't really speak to others, I can just speak to myself, and I can say that, well, first of all, this hasn't really been a crisis. So it's not really been an acid test for me, and I don't know that it's been much of an acid test for anyone here. I haven't done anything different. I mean, the only thing that's changed, and this may be really important in my life, is that I've decided to stay in Cambodia. I had planned to move to Turkey last year. Last year was going to be the World Nomad Games somewhere near Istanbul, and I thought, well, hell, I'll move to Istanbul. I mean, I like Istanbul. I can live there fairly cheaply, and seems okay. But I couldn't. I had also planned to spend some time brushing up my Chinese language in China at the beginning of the year. That didn't happen. I was planning to spend at least a month, possibly more, helping teachers in schools in Borneo, in the Dayak regions of Sarawak, and that didn't happen. I spent all of last year locked down. Well, not locked down, I mean, but let's say locked into the country, unable to leave. And it looks like the same is going to be true this year. So I wouldn't call it a crisis, I would call it watershed, maybe. Like that I'm comfortable. Now therein lies the problem, because comfort may also be a kind of crisis for me. I have a mantra that I put into a meme once. Maybe I'll even post it here if I get the chance. Comfort is the enemy. That when I feel too secure and comfortable, then I need to do something to shake things up. See, there's the thing. I think shaking things up is good for me. It gets me thinking. It gets me more imaginative, more productive in my writing and so forth. So that I wouldn't exactly say that I go from crisis to crisis, because I don't. But getting out of the comfort zone is good for me. It may also be good for countries. It may be that countries need to get out of their comfort zone once in a while in order to examine their values and to examine how good they are at what they're doing. So there is my topic
in a nutshell. I mean, what it comes down to is the comfort zone. What does your comfort zone look like? And when do you get out of it, and why do you get out of it, and what do you learn from being outside of your comfort zone? And similarly, how do cultures deal with their comfort zone? Generally speaking, I would say that comfort zones are bad for cultures, that they need to get out of them more often. In the case of the United States, their comfort zone has for too long been about ignoring social problems, ignoring racism, ignoring homophobia, ignoring xenophobia, ignoring gender issues, or papering over them, passing laws and saying, okay, it's illegal to be racist, or it's illegal to be homophobic, and so forth. But laws are not the solution. The solution has to come from within. And as an anthropologist, I can tell you that changing a culture, like reducing racism, reducing misogyny or xenophobia, doesn't come easily. It may take many generations, and it take active work, so that what this crisis has done in the United States is that it has exposed all of those things. It hasn't dealt with them. All right, comfort zones is my topic. And so I will end here, not because I don't have more to say, but because I don't want to wear you out. And I'll wish you a joyous weekend. I'm going to enjoy going back to teaching, and then I'm going to get on my bicycle and get my camera on my backpack and enjoy the time spent photographing, because we're in the monsoon season. So if I don't get cracking, I won't be able to do it. So meanwhile, if you've enjoyed this video, if you enjoy what I do, please tell your friends, and please like and subscribe, and I will see you on Tuesday.